for getting set up in a hurry and much less time than you thought you were going to have. We'll make sure that the next time we rent this space that we're down here before the city office closes and make sure that they've come over and unlocked for us, as opposed to just showing up. Appreciate it. Are we good?
We're good. Would you like to be mic'd?
Shh, I guess. I'm just going to do a quick intro, but sure. Just as well you didn't get that first little part there.
We are live streaming right now. In case anyone wants to know, go to BCACTV on YouTube. You can catch this live. Of course, if you're here, you don't need to do that, but you can text your friends and family.
Your office is basically right across the street.
That's right, right across the street.
It's all on the window.
You know, Jessica, it's probably going to take a few minutes.
You know, I don't need to be.
Okay.
Does, I think probably the judge will need to be, yes?
Judge is mic'd.
Excellent, all done. Well then,
May we snap pictures without city council here? Yeah, I take them when I'm here, so.
fine.
Just thank you. Okay.
Hi, guys. And to the extent that you're willing to do so, it would be great to kind of come down to the center and first couple of rows. If you're happy where you are and you don't want to do that, no problem, okay? So welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to have an intimate little group, which actually could be really cool, so that we'll probably have a longer Q&A, which will be fun for all of us. My name is Jessica McKenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the Inland Cannabis Farmers Association, one of the hosts for this evening. Before we get started, can we do some housekeeping and everybody turn off your cell phones? Would that be cool? That'd be great. Thank you for your kindness. I also want to let you know that we will be leaving time at the end of the talk for questions and answers. So make notes for yourself should you wish to do so. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to thank our co-hosts. In addition to Inland Cannabis Farmers Association, there is Butte County NAACP, the ACLU Northern California Chico chapter, the Chico State Democrats, and we do have a representative from them, and a small local business, I shouldn't say small, but a local business, Dutch Farms Organics. Perhaps we might give them all a hand for a responsible event. This evening, we are honored to present retired Judge James Gray. Judge Gray has a rich and colorful life story, which I'm not going to possibly do justice to. So I'll share just a few details and then turn you over to him. However, before I do the bio, I want to let you know that I found Judge Gray initially, or had the first interaction with him online, listening to a YouTube video. I was very excited that he was coming because he's bright and articulate, and he's a jurist who speaks to people in a way that non-jurists can understand. I've listened to attorneys and engineers and jurists in the past speak in ways that I'm left befuddled. So I really enjoyed that, and I loved what he had to say and how he had to say it. What I wasn't prepared for was what a wonderful human being he is. We have so enjoyed our time with him these past 2 days. He has huge heart and a great dry sense of humor, and I'm sure you will enjoy him.
She's setting me up.
I do that well. So, between college and law school, Jim was in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica. Talk about heart. Then a criminal defense attorney with Navy JAG, a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, a business litigator for about 5 years, and appointed to the bench at the end of 1983. In 1992, he did something a little unusual, probably a lot unusual for a sitting trial court judge. He held a press conference, and in it he stated as publicly as he could that our great nation's drug policies were not working and that we ought to put our heads together and figure out a way to change that. He's been speaking and writing about the failed system ever since, to the degree that he was the 2012 Libertarian candidate for vice president, along with Governor Jerry Johnson, I don't seem to be able to speak well, as candidate for president. The topic of his talk tonight is Our Drug Laws Have Failed, which is taken directly from the title of the book he wrote on the subject. So would you please join me in giving Judge James Gray a warm welcome to Chico.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Jessica, Michael, Judith. I am with good people. I found that
hit me between the eyes when I first got here, and we went today to your Board of Supervisors, and we heard numbers of people talking there about their Measure L. And it's just good to be with good people. Yes, I was deeply concerned. A former federal prosecutor. I used to be a drug lord, a drug warrior anyway. I was a Navy JAG attorney. I would write the charges against my shipmates when I was at the Naval Air Station in Guam. I held the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California, which was back in 1978, 75 kilos of heroin, about 160 pounds was and is a whole lot of heroin. Does anyone have a concept of what the largest drug prosecution is today in the Central District of California? 80 kilos of heroin in one place, or cocaine. You know, and you start, looking back, was raised pretty much the same that everyone else was raised, at least of my age, to equate marijuana or heroin with bad, with evil, with prison. And we just didn't think about it much, but they were bad things, and they did bad things to people, and people involved with them were bad, and all that sort of thing. And only when I was a judge in the municipal court, like we just heard from Jessica, beginning the end of 1983, I started seeing in my own courtroom that we're churning low-level drug offenders through the system. We're not harming anybody except sometimes themselves, ruining people's lives in many occasions, and taking a whole lot of resources doing it. And so I also started noticing that on occasion we would arrest, charge, convict, and sentence even some big-time cocaine dealers. And does that mean now that in Santa Ana, where I come from, that there's no cocaine being sold? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It's just an employment opportunity for somebody else. And so, yes, eventually it just got too much for me. And you keep thinking, why doesn't somebody do something? Why doesn't somebody say something? And then it appeared to me that, look, who better than a fairly clean-cut conservative judge in a conservative county, had never used any form of illicit substance and still haven't. At least if I were to speak out on this, and I have the background to do it, they'd at least have to listen to the message. And by and large, that's been working. And in 1992, I made the promise to people as often as I could that by the year 2000, we will have a materially different drug policy in our country. And I was absolutely convinced of that. Just get the word out there, start looking at it. Just what we're doing does not stand the test of time or the light of day. And of course, I was very wrong, that we're in a lot of ways, we're in worse shape today than we were back in 1992. More people incarcerated, larger amounts of drugs, stronger drugs killing people, no quality control and the rest. So I remember, I've been speaking publicly about this as often as I can, and one of the introductions that I received, I can vividly remember, almost quote verbatim, a lot different than what you heard from Jessica, and it was as follows. I know you all want to hear the latest dope from the courthouse, so here's Judge Gray. But a lot of them were more positive. But yes, I continue to speak about this. Since that time, the beginning, I would say, what our nation's drug policy isn't working and we need to put our heads together and change it. Now I tell the more accurate truth in my view, which is our drug policy of drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of the United States of America, second only to slavery. And it's true. And then I go on and tell people, and I ask you, whatever is close to your heart, whatever issue really, really excites you, moves you, and is concerning, I will show you to your satisfaction how it is made worse because of our drug policy of drug prohibition. And it doesn't matter. It can be education, healthcare, education, over-incarceration, environment. It doesn't matter. You tell me what the issue is, and I've never been unable to convince that person, at least on that issue, that it's made worse because of drug policy. We have options. That's the thing that people really don't think about. We have viable options. But if you look at it, and yes, I was proud to be the vice presidential candidate with Governor Gary Johnson, who is now running for president again as a libertarian, and he puts it as well as anyone. He says of all the problems, about 10% of the problems we have are drug problems. And yes, they can be harmful, and yes, they can cause difficulties, etc. Of course, many prescription drugs fit that bill as well. But 90% of the problems are drug prohibition problems, drug money problems. And he's right. And if you want to have one to hit you directly in the eyes, just think of Mexico. with all of these beheadings, with all of this corruption, with all of this violence, all of this fighting, has nothing to do with drugs at all. Nothing. It's all drug money that causes those problems, and it's our drug money that does it. And maybe we have kind of a responsibility to understand that and be a little more charitable to our neighbors to the south. And I can promise you, if Proposition 64 passes, and I'm very much in favor of it, it isn't what I would have designed, but it's pretty good. And in fact, we as libertarians, and I commend this to you, have a saying that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Proposition 64 is pretty good. Yes, it's very detailed, it's very long, but you may recall, back in 1996, we as the voters passed Proposition 215 for medical marijuana. I think you're probably aware of that. And it's taken our Sacramento folks, what, until last year to come up 19 years later, they come up with some viable regulations. So Prop 64 understands that. We don't want to have to do that again. And so it's pretty specific about what it would do. But one thing it will do, I'm confident, if and when we pass Proposition 64 here in California this November, it will be the functional end of national marijuana prohibition. I do not believe that the federal government will be able to take this poke in the eye that we're going to give them, saying they're going to lose California and it's just going to be too much for them, and then they will go back to what I lovingly call the concept of federalism. Hey, you remember that? Our country was founded on the concept of federalism. Allow each state to decide how best to serve and protect its people with regard to issues like this. And I'll ask, I mean, how many people here in Butte County feel that we as adults are able to decide how best to serve and protect our people with regard to the marijuana issue? I mean, of course, and people will acknowledge that all the way around. So let's get the federal government out of this stuff. And as Gary Johnson says, it will allow us to share a lot of victories and, yes, avoid a lot of failures so we can learn from each other. So that will be the end, in effect, I believe, of marijuana prohibition nationwide, and then we'll allow each state to do as, in fact, it wishes. By the way, who were the original founders, sponsors of this, what's called a Partnership for a Drug-Free America? And when I say that, I have to put my hand over my heart because it's just so touching to say a Partnership for a Drug-Free America. You know who the original sponsors of that organization were? The tobacco industry and the alcohol industry. Drug-free indeed. But it made perfect sense because they didn't want the competition, mostly from marijuana. And so you look at now who the sponsors are. You know who the present-day sponsors are of the Partnership for a Drug-Free America? It's the pharmaceutical industry. Drug-free indeed. But this is, again, it's money. And it makes perfect sense from a marketing standpoint that you must just try to get rid of some competition. There was a study recently by Cato Institute. Maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. And they took 17 states in our country that have legalized medical marijuana. And then they analyzed that and found that the pharmaceutical industry lost tens of millions of dollars in those 17 states because people were using medical marijuana instead of their basically narcotics. You wonder why they're against Proposition 64 and the rest of it? Makes perfect sense from a marketing standpoint, but it's obscene from a healthcare standpoint, obscene from a judicial standpoint. And we are the ones that are going to be able to change this. So these are really important things. And when you start looking at reality, it's not a bad idea to do occasionally. And as I say, the biggest oxymoron in our world today, you know, the word jumbo shrimp, you know, that's an oxymoron. The biggest oxymoron in our world today is the term controlled substances. Why? Because as soon as you prohibit a substance, you give up all of your controls to frequently very undesirable people. And I had an experience that really, really brought this home for me. I was on the municipal court bench. I was a municipal court judge. And on 4 different occasions, I was taking a plea of guilty to a charge of being under the influence of methamphetamine. There were 4 young men, as I basically recall, and under Health and Safety Code 11550 in the state of California, it was and is a mandatory minimum 90-day sentence. For various reasons, they had no reason to lie to me. I wasn't going to give them any more than 90 days. I couldn't give them any less than that. But they are required under California law to give me what's called a factual basis, which means they have to put in their own words why they are guilty of this offense. And each of the 4 of these young men told me basically the following. Your Honor, my drug of choice is marijuana. And I would always buy my marijuana from the same supplier. And one fine day, my supplier sold me some marijuana, unbeknownst to me, that was laced with methamphetamines. I smoked it a few times and got hooked. And I'm thinking to myself, each of those occasions, wait a minute. We all know that smoking cigarettes is harmful for your health, but at least when you go to your local mini-mart and buy a pack of Marlboros, you're going to know it's not laced with methamphetamines. That is a drug prohibition problem. Getting accuracy in the marketplace, understanding the quantity, the quality, the strength of these various drugs, those are easily remedied. You go back to alcohol prohibition, and you will see that we had an enormous, what I call bathtub gin problem, where you'd have a bad batch of this white lightning or whatever the prohibitionists were serving, and they wouldn't know it. They wouldn't have any quality control until some of their customers started drinking it and keeling over. It attacked their nervous system, etc. That problem completely went away when we repealed alcohol prohibition. And the same thing's going to happen with regard to these other drugs as well. Now, it's a fairly small group, and I want to talk about what you want to talk about. So now that I've gone into this a little bit and we're kind of into the subject, if you have any questions, first of all, I never exaggerate as far as I'm concerned. I always try to tell the truth. And for any reason, throughout our time together this evening, if you feel that what I'm saying doesn't resonate, isn't true, is exaggerated, literally, stand up, wave your arm, say, "Not so fast, Gray," and we'll talk about it. Okay? I don't need to exaggerate, because really all of the information is on the side of change. But if you go back to this alcohol prohibition, you see that these problems went away because now it was under regulation, it was under control. You would hear people say, wait a minute, nobody wants my 12-year-old daughter to get hooked on cocaine. And the answer is, sure they do. Why? Because marijuana is a gateway drug. It's a gateway to higher drugs because you're going to be involved with pushers that want her to get hooked on cocaine because they make more money. So you get into what I call the cardinal rule of drug prohibition, which is always sell the stronger stuff. Always push, always sell the stronger stuff. Why? Well, if I'm a bootlegger, we're back in alcohol prohibition, and I have a chance of selling a barrel of beer or a barrel of bourbon, which am I going to push? Well, the bourbon. Why? Because I make more money at it, right? And the criminal justice sanctions are the same. If you're going to sell marijuana today, you're going to get into the exact same criminal justice problems of selling weak marijuana as stronger marijuana. So which do you push? The stronger. Why? Because you make more money at it. Okay? And so if I am selling marijuana and I can get you hooked on cocaine or methamphetamines, I'll do it because you now belong to me. We don't have that in a regulated market. We can control these things. So, if you regulate and control a substance, you can, in effect, see where your problems are. I talked about having alternatives. How many of you're aware, you wouldn't be here this evening and sharing this time with us if you weren't aware of this issue. How many of you are aware of what's happened in Portugal since the year 2001? Anybody? Oh, wow. That's a much higher percentage than anywhere I've ever been. For the rest of you, I can tell you that in the year 2000, Portugal, the people who were running the country, realized that they had the largest drug problem of any country in the then European Union. So they did something really intelligent. They formed a commission of, get this, non-political experts. And they told them to task them to go out into the country, figure out what the problem is, come back and give us some recommendations. And that's exactly what they did. And it took them 7, 9, 12 months, whatever it was. And they came back and said, we have 2 problems in Portugal. Number 1 is the problem drug users are afraid of their own government. They are not going to bring their problems to the government. Why? Because if they do, they'll get punished. So they take them underground. And number 2, we are spending so much money on the investigation, prosecution, incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders, we don't have any money left for drug treatment. So you know what Portugal did? 2001, they decriminalized all drugs. Now, by the way, these words mean something. And let's start kind of at the beginning. I do not favor the legalization of any of these drugs. Simply flat out do not. Bad idea. If you're thinking a legalized drug, think aspirin. You know, you or your 15-year-old sister, daughter, or whatever could go to your local CVS market and buy a case of aspirin if you want to. You can buy generic, you can buy name brands. The price is set by the free market. You can advertise it as much as you want to. You know, no age restrictions, no problem. I don't know anybody that wants heroin or even marijuana to be that way. So the alternative would be the strictly regulated control, which is basically what I favor for marijuana, and you probably do too, which is basically treating it like alcohol, treating it like tobacco. Number 3, though, decriminalization is not the same thing at all. Decriminalization means that it is still illegal in Portugal or Holland, which is the other decriminalized country, to buy, use, possess, sell any of these drugs, but as long as you stay within very well-known general guidelines, the police are instructed, frequently in writing, to look the other way and leave you alone. Now, I'm a judge. I believe in having reasonable laws, and I believe in enforcing those laws, so this causes me some conceptual problems. However, Holland and Portugal are doing it far better than we are, so if we had to, I'd certainly recommend going that way. But nonetheless, Portugal decriminalized all drugs. So now, if a police officer, for example, finds somebody and they're under the influence of, you name it, they'll give them a citation, but not to come to a judge like me, but to go see some healthcare professionals. Then they'll tell them, you know, I'll tell you what, Charlie, I mean, what's your drug usage? What's your problems? What can we do to help? How can we be of assistance to you? You know what's happened in Portugal? The Cato Institute came out with a study where they digested about 9 years of information. And they came out and said, basically, drug usage in Portugal, countrywide, pretty much remained the same. Yes, it increased a little bit because of the novelty, but then pretty much went back to where it was before, which literally gives the lie to pretty much every drug czar we've ever had in our country, who has always said, oh, if we were to change our drug system, we'd become a nation of drug zombies or something like that. You know, not only is it silly, it's probably insulting. You know, if I were to give away, legalize, now, give away cocaine on the street corner out here for free, how many of you are going to go jam cocaine up your nose? You know, I'm not. I have enough trouble with my cholesterol for heaven. I mean, I care about my body, and most people do too. That's not going to happen, and it didn't happen in Portugal. However, they also found that the drug problem users went down by 50%, by half. Why? Because now they're no longer afraid of their government, and when they have a problem or they get cited to see some professionals, they come in and they get some assistance. They work with them. They've got partners who care about them. Problem drug usage has gone down by 50%. And, by the way, teenage drug usage has also gone down somewhat. Why would that be? Well, I was a teenager once, maybe some of you were as well. I kind of still remember the teenage frame of mind, which is, hey, why should I take these drugs and go see a doctor? That's no fun. There's no glamour in that. And to a large degree, of course, that's true. We glamorize these various drugs because they're illegal and because there's such an obscene profit motive in having people sell them. So that's what's happened in Portugal. Holland, by the way, the Minister of Health, a book that I wrote, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. You get through my book title, which is probably the longest one I've ever heard, you know exactly where I'm going. But I have a comment in there about Holland. In fact, about Portugal as well. It was updated in 2012. And the Minister of Health of Holland held a press conference and said, we decriminalized these various drugs back in the 1970s, and we only have half the marijuana usage per capita in our country as you do in America. Get this, both for adults and for teenagers. And most, probably, I'd say Judith would correct me, but probably a third of the people in Holland that use or abuse drugs are foreigners. You know, they come in for a good time, and of course we wouldn't have that problem in California. I do not anticipate a flood of people coming in from Nevada to use marijuana in California. You know, it's just, we're just big enough that it's just not going to happen. But they also, the Minister of Health of Holland explained why they were so successful, and that was, we have succeeded in making pot boring. Same thing that they found in Portugal. So we're doing it wrong. The United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our people. And guess what? Most of them are people of color. And here, I assure you, we're number one does not make me proud. And a lot of that is because of the war on drugs. Shame on us. Shame on us. This is not necessary. And I'm here, by the way, I brought some material. I just grabbed a few things. I've written an article, it's in the Oregon Law Review, which is closer, our top 10 drug policy goals. And if anybody would like a copy, I have 3 copies here, and if you'll promise me you'll read it, you're welcome to have it. I also have written a law review article on the death penalty, which, by the way, Proposition 62 is on the ballot. I heartily hope that you pass this. Vote in favor of the repeal of the death penalty. And I say in my article here, regardless of what your political philosophy is, it doesn't matter. It's not working. And we are taking advantage of the victims' families, the people. They're used as pawns. You know, I was involved with one death penalty case my entire time on the bench. I was a municipal court judge, and I held the preliminary hearing on a really bad guy. And we bound him over, and then he was convicted in Superior Court the next year. That was back in 1987 that he was convicted. He's still on death row now. You know, he still has not even had his case argued to the California Supreme Court. How many years? That was 29 years ago. I mean, it just isn't working. If you want some finality, and by the way, it costs about 6 times more for the taxpayers in California to process somebody for the death penalty than it would to process them for an LWOP, which is life without possibility of parole, and keep them in prison the rest of their lives. It just does not pencil out. Please support Proposition 62. Please support Proposition 64. There's other information up here as well if you would like to get into it. But I want to talk about what you want to talk about. There's so much to discuss. We have lost more of our civil liberties because of the war on drugs than really anything in our history. To the degree that in my book, I graduated from USC Law School in 1971, and I just used that as a cutoff point and cited what our United States Supreme Court had interpreted our mostly Fourth Amendment rights to be as of 1971, and then citing only United States Supreme Court drug cases have shown how we have lost our civil liberties because of that. How many of you believe that we in our great country are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to this critical issue of drug abuse and all the crime and misery that goes with it? Anybody? You know, but we've lost so many of our civil liberties along that way. Now, of course, the so-called war on terror is starting to go for the record as to our loss of civil liberties as well. But it's time that we stand up and protect our liberties. Our country was founded on liberty, and we are losing them to our government. And if you do, you never get them back. Yes, sir.
Judge Gray, my name's Ken Fleming.
Mr. Fleming.
I have had a very similar career to your own, except on the public health alcohol drug treatment side. In '67, I went to work for Sonoma County Mental Health Services. They had just started, and almost immediately we started having people who had been in the Hague, getting into trouble personally with drugs, showing up at the freeway exits in Santa Rosa and getting picked up and bringing to the help of the mental health program I was working with. There were virtually no treatment program. There were maybe, you could count all the treatment programs for drug abuse in California on your fingers at that time. Through the years, I have followed all of this, and let me say, I agree with every one of your points, but I've gotten there in a little different way.
Good.
I've got to say, I agree wholeheartedly with you that criminal justice has been a bigger problem in dealing with
You're getting to a question?
real issues around drug and alcohol abuse than they've been helpful. I'm going to go back to the beginning of when you mentioned prohibition. We have been through prohibition before this.
I call it alcohol prohibition. Now we're in drug prohibition. Yes.
In alcohol prohibition, I would say we handled the moving out of prohibition very badly. In fact, I would argue that it set the circumstances for what happened with drugs. I'm quite concerned about how we come out of prohibition. of drugs. And frankly, I am for prohibition. It's much easier to treat these. We could, probably with half the money in the criminal justice system, we can handle the treatment needs that will be necessary. How do you see the legislation in California handling some of the real treatment problems? What do you see as I want to hear about the problems with it in terms of moving us out of prohibition.
Sure. Mr. Fleming is talking about agreeing with some of these things, but is concerned about getting out of prohibition, feeling that we have lost an opportunity when we finally repealed alcohol prohibition because we basically just opened the doors and allowed full free competition. The question then is, how would I at least suggest that we get out of drug prohibition? Am I accurate? Okay. Complex issue. The way to do it from my standpoint, again, is to go with the concept of federalism, because I don't have all the answers. In fact, I try to run away real fast from anybody that says that they have all the answers. But if you go to the concept of federalism, say Illinois comes up with something that works pretty well, Indiana comes up, they're right next door, with something that they thought would be good, but it just doesn't work. So pretty soon they'd start saying, well, gee, I don't know, Gus, what do you think? That this isn't, we thought it was a good idea, but it's not. Look at over here at Illinois. Let's do what they're doing. So we can copy success and avoid failure. So that would be my first response. A major thing and a problem I have with Proposition 64, and I fought against it and was unsuccessful. We have a First Amendment right, and it's been adjudicated that it applies to people's products, that you can advertise. And I believe that if we were to come out of alcohol prohibition, or now drug prohibition, we should prohibit advertising. We should not allow any of these various substances to be advertised anywhere where anyone under the age of 21 would get it. Basically, I'd probably have a direct mailing to people that were interested as long as they were over 21. I do not want to glamorize this stuff. When I originally came out with my press conference, I issued handouts that said, I would think we should go to government package stores for heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. Have them in brown packaging, make them as boring as possible, no advertising whatsoever, put a warning label on them. If you're having a problem with these things, call 1-800 such and such for drug treatment. But what you need to do is get control on these things, which we will finally get. Take the glamour out as much as we can, and recognize, by the way, there's no such thing as a perfect system. Any human dispute, I talk about this now in my mediations, in most human disputes, there's no solution. I mean, there's just no solution. If you want a solution to something, become a mathematician, and I promise you that if you're going to multiply the width times the length of a rectangle, you're going to get the square, the area every time. That's a solution. Human disputes don't have them. We only have resolutions. We can resolve these disputes, try to maximize our benefits, reduce our detriments, and that's kind of a harm reduction sort of idea. So we're not going to have perfection. We certainly don't have it now, but we can get these various things under control and stop people from being afraid of their own government. I'm proud to say that I started the first drug court, to my knowledge, in the United States of America. I began as a judge at the end of 1983, and by June of 1984, I had up and running a drug court for alcohol-related offenses. It was the biggest municipal court problem that was not being addressed, and it basically worked. But I can tell you, it takes a lot of resources. And I learned from that, and I learned from, I'll go back to it, I learned that alcoholism is a medical disease, and it is 100% diagnosable. You may not know this, but in everyone's brain, of course, we have some fluid that goes around your brain, and if you are an alcoholic, there will be a deposit of some kind of black substances. It's called dihydroisoquinoline, DHIQ, and it's visible to the naked eye. So it's 100% diagnosable. The problem with this is that it's only diagnosable by autopsy, so we don't have many people volunteering to take this treatment. But it's a disease, and addictions to other drugs of this kind are also diseases. And so you come to a political philosophy as well as a pragmatist. I deem myself to be a pragmatist, but I'm also a libertarian, and fortunately most of the time it's consistent. You all know who this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. is, I assume. He is almost a lifelong heroin-addicted person. Right now he's doing pretty well from what I can understand, but he'll have to be careful. He'll always have that craving. But it makes as much sense to me to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. She's of course, as you know, was the wife of President Gerald Ford and was a self-acknowledged alcoholic. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's a medical issue. Bring the people closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle impaired by, you name it, methamphetamines, heroin, alcohol, which is my drug of choice, marijuana, that's a crime. What's the difference? Really crucial, important thing to focus upon. What's the difference? And the answer is, if I'm driving a motor vehicle impaired by any of these mind-altering, sometimes addicting drugs, now I'm putting your safety at risk. Legitimate criminal justice function. But it makes as much sense to me to have the government tell me as an adult what I can put into my body as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. And by the way, it doesn't work. You know, if you get to a crime of driving under the influence, or if I hit you over the head with a pool cue or something like that, you're going to be a complaining witness. The criminal justice system is well spotted, designed, and effective at keeping me from hurting you. It is not well designed at all, nor intended to keep me from hurting me, from protecting me from myself. It doesn't work, nor should it. I can go home tonight. I'm not going home tonight, but I'll be home tomorrow, and I could drink 11 martinis if I wanted to, okay? Clearly not a smart thing to do, clearly medically not healthy, but not a violation of law, nor should it be. So what's the difference if, in fact, I take some other mind-altering, sometimes addicting substance instead? And the answer should be none, unless now I'm putting your safety at risk. So these are things, they're distinctions. And I'm here to tell you that today, basically, our nation's drug policy is go ahead and die. I know what the problem is. You know, you kind of overdose, but we're not going to have you have naloxone. Or I know what the difficulty is, but if you flunk my drug morality test, you can die of AIDS, or you can die of an overdose because you flunked my morality test. What kind of a position should that be? And that is the position of the United States of America. Michael?
Yeah, how the tensions that are running across the country today between police forces and especially people of color. And we've seen the problems, the shootings and the things going on.
You're going to have to speak up for me, though, please.
I was saying the tensions that we have today that seem to be going across the country where we have our police force and our citizens at odds with each other. How strong an influence do you think the war on drugs?
How strong an influence or effect does the war on drugs have with regard to the tensions between the people and the police today? A great deal. I believe, I don't know why, for example, the black community is not standing up in arms and fighting against the war on drugs, because all of the guns really in the war on drugs are focused on the black community. You know, I tell people, I've spoken at black churches or various other groups, and I get mad at them. I say, I know you're my hosts, but I'm upset with you. If people that looked like me were in prison nearly as much as people who look like you, we wouldn't stand for it. Why are you so quiet? And, you know, marijuana is used big time by police as furnishing probable cause to arrest, to search, find worse offenses, guns, all that sort of stuff. And they're not searching me, they're searching people of color. It really has created a great deal of suspicion and animosity, and it's no group in the country uses drugs or abuses drugs any more than any other. And it doesn't matter, it can be economic, racial, you know, almost religious. And if any group uses or abuses drugs more than any other, it's mine. It's upper middle class, white, Caucasian males. I'm not arrested nearly as much as people in lower economic areas. So all of these things come together, and if you pursue that, and I have in my book, I have a history on the war on drugs, the prohibitionary laws, they're all racially motivated. All of them. You know, the Harrison Narcotics Act, 1914, basically was against those blacks. They didn't call them blacks then, call them something worse. But we didn't care about what the blacks did, but we didn't want them to assault our white women. They'd get high on cocaine, and you know, and they'd have to, they would. So we have to protect this. You know, in San Francisco, that was, to my knowledge, the first drug of prohibitionary laws was against opium dens. We could care less if the Chinese men got it. Oh, but they were going to lure white women into depravity. That's why the opium dens were outlawed. And of course, you know, marijuana. They didn't even know what marijuana was in Congress in 1932-33 when they passed the Marijuana So-Called Tax Act. They thought it was a you can go back to the congressional record. A lot of them thought it was a narcotic. They didn't know what it was. They were onto this reefer. How many of you have seen the movie Reefer Madness? You know, unintentionally quite funny, except it's scary. And as those of you who haven't seen it, you know, you have this middle-class white man, high school boy, wearing a coat and tie, if best I recall, 2 puffs of marijuana cigarette and turns him into a hatchet murderer. I mean, it's weird. But there was a hysteria. And it was for those Mexicans. You know, we don't want those Mexicans to come in here and take advantage of our white women. Had Congress known that they were outlawing hemp, they would have laughed and never done it. They didn't even know. Okay? So, and I am a judge. I'm supposed to enforce these laws, and I do. That's my obligation. I don't have to do so quietly. But yes, it's had an enormous effect upon these people. Yes, Ellen.
You mentioned the Cato study of how insurance companies, or how pharmaceutical companies lost money in states with legal medical cannabis. There was also another study that was recently released that in states with legal medical cannabis, Medicare saved 25% of what they had been spending on pharmaceuticals. I'm certain that all of the commercial carriers took notice of this because the natural enemy of the pharmaceutical companies is the insurance companies. To what extent can we put these two at each other's throats?
The question is, the question is with regard to studies. When you went for those states that had medical marijuana, yes, the pharmaceutical companies lost a fair amount of money, which they did, but Medicare saved quite a bit of money. So the question is, how can we, in fact, put those two at each other's throats, and regardless of what happens, we'll end up winning as the consumers. You know, I don't have all the answers, but I believe that really education is the answer, to put these things out publicly. In that regard, we have all experienced an enormous success story with regard to mind-altering, sometimes addicting drugs that we have seen. What is the biggest, most dangerous, sometimes addicting drug, mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug that is in our society today? Most dangerous for the user, and it is tobacco, by far. About 450,000 people a year die because they themselves, every year in our country alone, because they themselves smoke cigarettes.
Leading preventable cause of death.
And a preventable cause of death. We have seen an enormous success story with regard to cigarette consumption, have we not? Not because we made it illegal. Now wait a minute, if the government really cares about our safety and our medical health, why didn't they make tobacco illegal? Well, first of all, you make my mother a criminal, all that sort of stuff. She was addicted to cigarettes. But no, we've done it because we put honest information out into the marketplace. We have regulations. Hey, look at that sign over there. You know, remember when people could smoke on airplanes? Oh my goodness. You know, we regulate, we control, and we put honest information out there. Use social mores, and these various other drugs, first of all, they will not start killing people because we're going to know what's in them. Remember my methamphetamine sentences. And plus, we'll bring it under the law, we'll tax it, we'll regulate it, and we will address problem usage. It's not that hard. It's just not that hard. And this is where we should go. This is where we must go. And fortunately, those of us in drug policy reform know this is where we will go. It's just a question of time. Yes, sir.
Going back to healthcare costs, I was thinking about this on the way over this evening. I've seen
More what?
More medical doctors for a period of time in my life than when I was a young kid or younger. And so, I did this, looking over review these test results, and not one time in the last, I would say last 6, 7 visits to a physician, different physicians, describe to me what is the medical condition I have and how to cure it. All I get the answer is, take this medication, go get some examination. So the healthcare facilities have accumulated so much of paperwork, so much about logging of individuals' information that as, you know, patients to come in there, we don't even know what's in our medical files. We don't have full disclosure. We don't have terminology. We don't have definition. What is the condition that we have, and what is this medication that's good for? Why are we taking this medication?
Okay.
So I see that basically to cut the cost of health care is cut the time of visits for physicians by putting some strict policies. Healthcare providers, our physicians in a position to say, look, you see the patients, you must give full disclosure on their visits.
Okay.
That includes, I'm talking also includes drugs and medication.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, we've kind of shifted gears here, and it's a very important subject. And he's talking about the whole healthcare system, basically. And he is saying that he sees many medical physicians and is basically not given information about even his own medical situation. Basically said, you know, just go take this medicine, take that medicine, and the rest. I have rather strong views on this. It's not exactly what I came here to talk about, but I will not resist the temptation. I was raised, I'm as old as many, probably older than anybody else in the room, or pretty close to it. And I was raised during the 50s and 60s. And back then, it was not even a topic of conversation that we cannot find reasonable medical care at reasonable cost. It just wasn't even discussed. We had all the emergency rooms we wanted. You know, it was just not a problem. And then the government starts getting involved. And they get more and more involved, and every time they do, it makes it more complicated and worse. And now, basically, where we are with the so-called Affordable Care Act, which I view as just heading us off a cliff, we are basically trusting our medical care to our local Department of Motor Vehicles. And that's, and we're no longer partners in our own medical care. So I say, look, let's take an example, not what you were saying, but if I have a bad knee, and I go see a doctor, and I say, Doc, I got a bad knee. And the doctor looks at me and says, Jim, you want an MRI? Okay, today, if that is asked of me, what's going to go through my mind? Well, let's see. I pay a lot of money for my medical, I have Anthem Blue Cross. I'm also on Medicare, so it's going to probably cost me maybe a copay of $30. Sure, why not? I'll do it, because I might as well get a Cadillac every time. If I'm paying the cost myself, like my parents used to in the 50s and 60s, my response to my doctor is, I think I should have an MRI? Doctor, what's it going to show me and how much is it going to cost? If you ask that question today, the doctor won't even know. Cost is not even a factor. It's not part of the equation. But if I would pay it myself, so you can go to medical savings accounts, for example, and put a certain amount of money in there every year, and it's your money, and if you don't spend it, it rolls over to the next year. So if it's your money, you're going to get your money's worth. And you are going to again become a partner with your medical doctor in your own medical care, like we used to be. For those people, by the way, that can't afford this sort of thing, I would give out vouchers that you can use in the private sector to be able to purchase health care insurance. What's going to happen? Costs are going to come down because competition will go up, and you will again become a partner of your own medical care. Now, I don't know if that was a direct response to what you were asking, but we've got to get the bureaucracies out of our life. Get the government. There is nothing in the Constitution of the United States of America. I'm writing a musical now on the Constitutional Convention, so I'm into the founding fathers, actually the founders, because there were founding mothers as well. Abigail Adams is one. But nonetheless, the most important principle of government to the founders of our country was to protect our freedoms from the encroachment of government. The second most important was keeping us safe from each other and from foreign invasion. And our founding founders would be very upset with us because we've given away all these things. There's nothing in the Constitution, you can look in vain, that says the federal government can get involved in our health care. Can't get involved in our education either. And by the way, I have a book here, if anybody would like it, on school choice issues, which are really important. But at any rate, okay, I'm a little bit off the subject, but that's, maybe I'm even losing a couple of you, but that's what I believe. Anyone else? Sir.
I've been a criminal defense attorney. I'm retired now for 28 years. And originally, marijuana was all about having fun and listening to music and going for walks in the woods and sex, and everything was better on marijuana. And then later, with Prop 215, marijuana started, well, if you have a medical condition, you should get a script or a recommendation, use marijuana. And people were trying to fit into that. Well, it helps me sleep, it helps me with this or that.
Backaches are the big one.
Whatever. And at first I was like skeptical, but I didn't care, you know, marijuana's fine with me. And then I started seeing people who were giving up prescription medications and replacing with marijuana and doing very well with it. And so the question is, why is the FDA and the DEA continue to deny that marijuana has any medical benefit whatsoever?
Okay.
And it clearly seems to.
The question is, and it goes to the root of a major set of hypocrisy in the United States government. And the question is, how could the DEA or the federal government continue to say that marijuana should be a Schedule I drug? And as you know, within the last few months, the DEA has reaffirmed that. How, by the way, if they do that, first of all, they have a patent on marijuana also, so that's a bit inconsistent. But number two, are you aware, yes, the native plant, the marijuana, has no medicinal value whatsoever. It's a Schedule I drug, but the artificial, the synthetic marijuana, it's called Marinol, that is a Schedule III drug. It can be prescribed. Now, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. If the synthetic marijuana has some medicinal properties, why shouldn't the natural one? And the answer is very directly. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent a plant. They cannot make money on the plant marijuana or cannabis, but they can make money on the synthetic. And so they have used their political muscle, their political power, their political bribes, whatever you're going to call it, to get Marinol a Schedule III drug. And it's called hypocrisy. In fact, I already told Michael this story earlier today. I'm having fun here, I hope you are. When I was in junior high school, I came across this word. I was reading the newspaper, and it was a very strange written word, it's chutzpah. And I'd asked my father, I said, Dad, what is this word? What does chutzpah mean? And he said, Jim, I'm going to tell you a story, and you will never, ever forget what the word chutzpah means, and you probably won't either. And the story was that there was this fairly young man who was at an exclusive club, and he looked over and he saw J. Paul Getty, you know, the oil magnate, sitting at a table by himself eating his breakfast. And so he went over to him and said, Mr. Getty, you don't know me, but my name is Robert Harris. And pretty soon, I'm being interviewed by a man for a really important job application that I have. And I wonder, I know you don't know me, but I wonder if you, when you're done with your breakfast, should just come over and say, oh, hi, Robert, it's nice to see you again, or something like that. And he went back and sat over there, and pretty soon Getty was, well, what does he think he is, and stuff like that. Pretty soon he looked over, and yeah, he saw this older, distinguished gentleman sitting with Mr. Harris, and finally he ended up paying his bill and thought, you know, it shows some gumption. It won't cost me. I'll go over and do it. So he walks by and he says, hi, Robert, how you doing? Whereupon this guy looks up and says, oh, come on, Getty, can't you see I'm busy? And that's called chutzpah. And I've never forgotten what that means. The federal government is involved beyond hypocrisy. It's chutzpah. And it's caused by money. Government is money. Government is power. And if you want to get government money out of government, the only way is to get government out of money. And that's what we need to do. We will never get the government. We'll always have these lobbyists and stuff because there's so much money involved. And it's sheer money. It's hypocrisy, and it's outrageous. And it's going to change. Proposition 64 will do it. Other questions? My goodness sakes. Yes, sir. Oh, almost. No. Yes.
I just wanted to say generation. I'm 39, but we kind of word it a little differently. Where the war on drugs, we see it more of a war on poverty, where the kids today, when they sell pot, it's hey, I want to have a nice car, I want to impress this girl, I want to go buy a stupid video game that costs $64 this week, and then next week it's down to 20. Everybody knows what it is. It's hard to survive out there. There's a piece of pop cultural reference where they have an expression called NEETs, no education, employment, or training. So what it is, it's a war on apathy that we're trying to convey, that I think you're trying to convey. So I agree with you saying, it's just a different language.
I say it a bit differently. You're talking about, in effect, a war on poverty, where I think I can phrase and answer your question this way. You go into a lower economic area, and they are at least somewhat rooted in reality. They know that there are not many Michael Jordans or Kobe Bryants in this world. Their chances of being able to make it big in the NFL, the NBA, let's be realistic, it may not happen. We might as well take out billboards saying, hey, you want to get some real money here? You'll never make as much money in anything as you can by selling drugs. And if you don't think the kids in the inner cities or anywhere else are reading those messages, you're crazy. It's money. There was a Catholic priest, really good guy, in the down and out areas, and was talking with Hispanic kids that were joining gangs. And he was just officiating over more and more funerals. And he'd sometimes take these other kids that were starting to join juvenile gangs. And by the way, juvenile gangs are using the war on drugs as recruiting tools. Hey, you want to make some money? You want to be part of the action? Come and join our gangs. It's not a good thing to see. And he would go into it and take some of these kids aside and say, look, Rodolfo, you saw the funeral service that we just did for Mario over here. He was involved in selling drugs, you don't want to go that way. And he says, oh yeah, sure I do. Mario had gold rings, and he had a nice car, and he had 2 girls on his arm. Yeah, he was dead, and I may be dead in 5 years, but at least I'll have a good time between now and then. That's the message that's out there. Yeah, the drugs can be harmful. Go back to Gary Johnson. 10% of them are drug harms. 90% of them are drug money harms. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find. Don't listen to me. Well, listen to me some of the times. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find. What is easier for you to get if you want to? Marijuana or alcohol? And every last one of them will say, if I wanted to, it'd be easier for me to get marijuana. Why? Because the illegal marijuana dealers don't ask for ID. That's the least of their problems. Today, you will not find high school kids selling Jim Beam bourbon to each other in their high school campuses. They could, but there's no money in it. Yes? But they're selling marijuana, ecstasy, or any of that stuff all the time because it's illegal, because they can get money in it. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. And Prop 64 is the way. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's not as good as it could be, but it's sure good enough to repeal national marijuana prohibition. And then you know what's going to happen? And I'm sure the federal government knows this. This is just me. I can't cite anything. I still believe it. 85% of the people in our country that use any form of illegal substance today use only marijuana. Okay? They don't go beyond that. They use marijuana, basically replacing alcohol a lot of the times with marijuana. So if you take away those people from the criminal justice system, literally everybody else in the country using every other illegal drug combined will not justify this colossal bureaucracy we have to fight the war on drugs. And so we'll start using alternatives. Switzerland has a wonderful program where they actually find heroin-addicted people, bring them into clinics, prescribe heroin for them. They can get it at pharmaceutical prices. None of these drugs are expensive. As you know, marijuana is a weed. It'll grow pretty much anywhere. And the opium poppy is a beautiful flower. It'll grow anywhere as well, to the degree that you may not be aware of this, that the National Park Service was growing the opium poppy at Monticello for years until the DEA found out about it and made them take it out. If it'll grow in Virginia, it'll grow anywhere. The only reason these drugs are expensive is because they're illegal. So in Switzerland, the heaviest using heroin addicted person can support his or her habit for a maximum of $10 a day. It's just not that expensive, and they're leading pretty much normal lives. We'll start adopting those programs here. That'll take heroin abuse pretty much out of the system. It's the beginning of the end. It's important. Please support. Tell your people, tell your social media folks, tell anybody, support Proposition 64. Do you now have a question? You're teed up here. You're up.
My personal assistant called you and arranged for you to be here today.
Don't get excited. It's okay.
Sorry about that.
We don't bite.
I appreciate everything you said, and all due respect your background and history.
Thank you.
Without any doubt. The economic opportunity, I guess, back in the 70s and 80s, we used the word legalization, and the word legalization meant just free use. And then the word settlement, like we're talking about now, something's better than nothing. Don't shoot the soldier that's whatever got the bad news. It's half bad news. But then we sort of settled for decriminalization, which
means something completely different, as we tried to say.
Something at the time, less jail time for people in terms of overall. So, and then that evolved over time into the medical, because people were using it more. It naturally evolved into our current medical. Now, the medical business, the economy of the medical side of it, we know there's medical benefit. Everybody, every animal, every mammal has an endocannabinoid system. So, like vitamin C, you need the supplement. Babies to adults to old people to dogs. So that's not a question whether children should have it or not. We're not questioning that. But the question is, medically, it's going to be proven. But now we're saying legalization, but we still have the same jail time, basically. So we're not really getting rid of imprisonment. We still have imprisonment for possession, and at the same
Under
time,
Prop 64?
we have yes, we still have imprisonment. And we still have, yeah, absolutely. You have incarceration for. Here's a comparison, right? I'm not arguing with you, but this is one of your guys, your consultant's chart. He's an old cannabis guy. I know him. He's the guy who put this together, Conrad. And so the question is that the economic barrier here, what we're facing here is the marijuana industry, right? If you know, I don't know if you participate in cannabis, right? Okay, so that's an issue in itself as well. But the industry exists, and the industry is the face of the industry is in this room. These people here that maybe went to college or didn't go to college or high school. So that's the people who run it. But the 60 some odd pages of initiative, which was paid and bought for by people like Sean Parker, people in charge of one of the greatest ministries in the country, other individuals that, Mr. Magic Soap Bar Company. These are the guys that are the individual proponents saying Prop 64, versus then you go to the opposite side, you have the founder of Humboldt Growers Association saying, no, we don't like it. Or the chief executive officer, executive director of California Growers Association, which most of these members are supported by today. That's their industry. Our industry is saying, I don't like it because of the economic devastation it will cause by causing the the barriers to entry. So rich guys, filthy rich guys, creating a plan to legalize, quote unquote legalize, but not really legalize it, control it. And the word control is not legalize or decriminalization. That's an evil word in itself. But the small guys, 3/4 of the people in this room will be put out of business the day that it is put into action. Because the stack of paper it's going to take to process 69 pages plus of legislation, of regulation and control, that nobody knows how to run that industry that's promoting it, to try to control an existing business instead of letting the people that understand the industry, and they're all small individuals.
Okay.
They're not killing each other, right?
The question.
So how do you prevent the barrier to entry to the person who's in the business today, or
Sure.
the person in the economic turmoil who wants an opportunity in this country, but he's just crossed up the top because only for the rich and famous and educated?
Okay, very important question, and to try to summarize it, I do understand that there are people here, in fact, it's sponsored by your cannabis growers, small growers, wherever it is. First of all, I don't pretend to have all the answers. Secondly, Prop 64 was not my original idea. Thirdly, you're going to have a lot of fear of small growers that they're going to be wiped out by the Philip Morris of this world or Robert Mondavi or something like that. I understand that. And to some degree, it's correct.
Can you repeat his question?
The question is basically, they're afraid that the small growers are going to be run out of business on Prop 64. There's lots of cumbersome requirements, bureaucracies. The big guys are going to be able to have a lot of benefits that they won't have. I understand that Prop 64 has been written to give people that are currently in business a leg up, and that in fact there's a delay on this for 4 or 5 years. I'm not an expert on this. I can't respond to a lot of this. I can say that economies of scale will happen, and there are some people that will lose market share. No doubt about it, and I'll be very open with that. That's going to be true. But if you go back to the wine business, Robert Mondavi is a huge winery, and they have economies of scale like you can't believe, and mechanizations and all the rest of that sort of stuff. But you can go through almost, in Paso Robles, go through all of these other small boutique wineries are thriving. Why? Because they find a niche. And as I understand, I've never smoked marijuana, so I'm certainly not the one to talk to, but I do understand that marijuana is as much boutique or more than alcohol and the wineries. And that you're going to find your own niche, you're going to find this strain or that strength or whatever else, and you're going to thrive from my standpoint. Some may go out of business. That's true. That's the way life goes, I suppose. Some big guys will go out of business too because, you know, they're not going to know what they're doing. But I don't see that as much as a threat.
How do people get in the business if they can't get in it?
JR, I think you're asking the question. That question is the wrong question for this speaker.
I just cannot respond to that. Yes.
Hi, Jim. My name's Weston Mickey. I was friends with Steve Collette before he passed away.
Wow,
And I know
good for
Diane
Steve.
Goldstein
Okay.
personally, and I've hung out with you many times at Steve's house in the past. And
Yes, I'm a member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and there was a wonderful man, Steve Collette, who had a heart of gold, and he all of a sudden, at a very young age, keeled over and died, and we are friends. Yes.
The reason I wanted to come here and talk to you today wasn't so much about Prop 64, but about a dirty cop here in Butte County by the name of Doug Patterson, and I'm sure you guys all know this piece of shit. And pardon my French, I went and I filed an internal affairs investigation against him with the DEA and the local sheriff's office, and now I'm being targeted by both these guys, by both the DEA and the sheriff's office for turning in a guy who engaged in behavior similar to the Yuba County sheriff who was caught driving 247 pounds of marijuana from California to Pennsylvania. So I just want to let you know, and you guys all know who I am. You guys know I'm a 14-year activist in this business. I organized most of Measure A campaigns here. I've cost this county probably millions and millions of dollars out of their coffers. But I just want to reiterate for you that if something does happen to me, if I end up dead or in prison, just know that it was Doug Patterson, the piece of shit, dirty-ass corrupt cop who is engaged in serious criminal behavior, targeting. He's targeted certain people, lets other people go, people that pay their pockets, and that guy's established so much power into this county. It's ridiculous, and that's
Okay.
another reason that we need legalization. So just know that Doug Patterson is a piece of shit, and I hope you guys all know that.
The question is, you know,
That's all I'm
he is,
saying. It was nice
and
to
thank you for that, and I wish you justice. That's all I wish for you. That's probably all you'll need. You know, I hear stories that are appalling. I believe in our system. I honestly believe that the criminal justice system and the civil justice system is doing a pretty good job. It could certainly be better and the rest of that, but we clearly have some problem areas. One of them is perjury, for example. You know, we don't treat perjury, lying under oath, nearly seriously enough, and it disrupts the whole system. When I hear, and I'm kind of a clearinghouse, as you can imagine, because I hear stories of this kind because I am a judge, or now retired, and I've come out in favor of change. Stories like this turn my stomach. They make me weep. Whether they're true or not, I have no information. I don't know. But if they are, they should be pursued. Look, we get the government we deserve. And in my view, we're not doing a particularly good job. And we all are in a situation in which, as citizens, we live in a wonderful country. We get many blessings by being Americans. Where we are, who we are, how we are. In fact, I'll bet you if you were to think about it, no one here would change places with King Henry VIII. You know, I mean, he had the gout, he had the world at his disposal, he didn't have nearly what we have. You know, we are blessed, but we have obligations. One obligation, yes, in my opinion, is to vote. Another is to pay your taxes. I'm a libertarian, taxes are too high, etc. But we do need a government and we should pay our taxes, and let's talk about that later. But another one is, and jury duty as well. I'm sorry, I believe in jury duty. It is where the citizens can really control the government, really important. But another one is each of us, in whatever station we are in, our obligation is to make the system work. If you have information about somebody that is particularly in government, they should be held accountable. We believe in accountability at all levels of society, and as a judge, I'm fully prepared. I've been living in a fishbowl for a long time. I'm fully prepared to be accountable for my actions. And if you have information that anyone in government, or really, by and large, is corrupting our society, you have an obligation to come forward. That's what this young man was saying. If he's right, I admire him for filing these various statements, and if for any reason now the IRS is going to audit him, or they're watching his car in case he makes a California stop or something like that, that's an atrocity. That's an institutional corruption that we as one should rise up and protect him. We have an obligation to do that. So, yes.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit more detail about why you see Prop 64 toppling the federal prohibition on marijuana, why that passing would do that, and
Sure.
especially you said that they've just kind of reinvigorated themselves about the DEA's
Yes.
schedule.
The question is, how am I so bullish that Proposition 64 will in effect turn over federal marijuana prohibition? A valid question. It's just me. I can't really cite anybody other than my inferences on this stuff. California is a big state. California gets a great deal of attention. We led the world with regard to Prop 215 and medical marijuana. Hooray for us. We were kind of preempted by Colorado, and Colorado's had some problems because they were the pioneer and they were going first. I think we're doing better with regard to Prop 64. Still some problems, without a doubt. But we'll get a great deal of notoriety. The world, when the United States sees that the world will heave a sigh of relief and follow our lead by doing away with marijuana prohibition and probably drug prohibition soon, they will be pleased with that. It's such a finger in the eye, is the only explanation I can give you, for California to come up to the federal government and say, you're a bully, get out of here. We're no longer going to follow this. We have legalized, regulated and controlled marijuana, and I just don't think the federal government's going to be able to recover from that. And that, by the way, if I were to be holding a marijuana cigarette right here, I could have a medical marijuana card, and it is a violation of federal law. We all know that. Supremacy Clause and all the rest. I was a federal prosecutor, and the secret is the federal government does not have the ability to prosecute volume. And they couldn't possibly prosecute all of these people. And you know something else? If they were to try, and I were to demand a jury trial, there is no jury in California that would convict me of possessing this marijuana cigarette. And they know that, and they don't like to lose. So they're political as well, and it's just my reading of the tea leaves, or some leaves, that tells me that this is going to turn that over, whatever the leaf that breaks the monkey's back or camel's back or whatever it is.
So I know we got a little bit of a late start here this evening, but I think we do have an end time for the room, so if we could maybe take one or at most two more questions.
I'll take two more questions and then leave you with, I'll take three more questions because I see three hands up. Yes, 1, 2, and 3. And thank you guys for coming, by the way.
I'm a local physician, MD, in the area for the past 6 years.
I really admire your taste in clothes.
And before I moved to California, I lived in LA for about 2.5 years before coming up here. And, it was a stigma. I was 31 years old, new, evaluating patients. I needed a job, and so I started evaluating patients for medical cannabis. And it was a new thing. Of course, the stigma was still there. And I learned a lot as I was evaluating as a physician and so on. Moved up here, and, I've seen the prevalence. I mean, a lot of my patients are growing it, and they're telling me about all the secrets, all the medical uses, and so on and so forth. And even in medical school, I did learn that cannabis, it had 2 indications for post-chemotherapy, for HIV,
Nausea, yeah.
and also for glaucoma. So
Yeah.
it's being taught in medical school
good.
uses behind it, especially now the endocannabinoid system. Having said that, now with Prop 64, now I kind of have a reservation because, you know, I see the positive effects of cannabis with different tinctures and so on, and I advocate for that. However, you know, with 64, where's the medical come into play? I mean,
Yes.
are patients going to, do they still have to come in to get a recommendation to get certain medicinal grade?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I want to know as a physician, where do we play in this?
Sure.
And
This one I actually can answer. Proposition, first of all, this man is a physician. You're here. He came from Los Angeles until he saw the light and came up here to Chico. And he did learn actually in medical school that at least marijuana had two viable properties. One was for glaucoma. The other was to relieve nausea after chemotherapy, stuff like that. But he asks the question of, okay, he's into medical marijuana. He believes in it. He wants to recommend it to his clients or his patients. But what would happen under Prop 64? And there's a direct provision in Proposition 64 that it will have no effect whatsoever, no change upon medical marijuana, Prop 215 and its progeny. So it will make no difference, except one, and that is that it will relieve medical marijuana people from paying the extra 15% tax that recreational marijuana people will have to do. Yes, it will not change that. If you want to go for medical, you'll have to have the recommendation. If you want to decide to be recreational instead, then you'll pay the extra 15%, but you then don't have the recommendation.
Do physicians have to do separate training for this, or is it you can do that for right now?
Will you have separate training? The answer to that is I don't know. But
It's still gonna be 215.
it does not change. Does not change 215.
It's
Well, MRSA,
the new-
those are the
so
regulations
coming
for
out
Prop
with
215.
Regulations and things for you to follow over the next couple of years. Look up the MCRSA and the statewide regulation board in charge of cannabis, and they'll be giving you suggestions, recommendations, rules, guidelines, all that stuff over the next 3 years.
Yes, good. Okay. Question number 2, sir.
Yeah, I work with the ACLU here in Chico.
Thank you for that.
Do you have a working relationship with the ALCU, and you think they're being effective?
Okay, that is a compound question, as we say in my area. He is with the ACLU up here. Do I have a relationship with the ACLU down in Orange County? The answer is yes. Are they effective? The answer, I've spoken to a lot of ACLU groups, and I tell them without fail, I'm really glad you're here. I don't always agree with positions you take, but thank you for being here and thank you for doing it. The ACLU is effective. They take controversial causes sometimes, so they're not always, but our country is better because we have people in the ACLU protecting our civil liberties, even if I don't agree with all of their positions. I don't even always agree with my own positions. Yes. Final question. Then I'll tell you a story, and I'll be the last one out of here. If you have further questions, feel free to come up. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. And again, Jessica, Michael, Judith, thank you for hosting me. I've really appreciated it up here. Yes?
You mentioned before, when the gentleman was here before he left, that, it's our duty to, I guess, protect people like that when, you hear stories about people like ourselves that, come here and stick up for what we believe in. Or let's say putting somebody, on the spot for corruption or whatever the case may be. What are other things that we can do to protect ourselves from being targeted like that guy just said he's being targeted? Like, that guy doesn't even seem like he can sleep at night. You know
Okay.
what I mean? It's an extent to where it's like, do we want to stay hidden and not say anything and not stick up for the people, and throw people under the bus that deserve to be thrown under the bus? Or, to what extent can we protect ourselves and make sure that we're not going to be harassed and targeted?
Okay, the question is, going back to this young man here who feels that there was a police officer that is corrupt. That's what he was saying. And the question basically is, what can we do to protect ourselves? What can I do to protect myself from an IRS audit? What can I do to keep the DEA from... I thought that the DEA would come after me, or the sheriffs and the rest of that. The answer is, life is uncertain. I wish I could give you an answer. It's a question... You can't fight everything. You can't fight everything at once, and it just depends what you are in. I can only tell you that all I can do is speak for me. It was unknown if a sitting trial court judge would hold a press conference. My presiding judge, I told him, I even gave him my handouts and told him a week in advance, this is what I'm going to do, and he didn't say anything. He said, I don't agree with you, but okay. The next time I saw him was on Channel 11 News speculating that there was going to be an ethical inquiry about me. Thereafter, he apologized to me, but that's what he said. I received a letter from the Judicial Performance Commission, which is basically our ethical watchdog. And they said, "Dear Judge Gray, I'm sure you have heard speculation in the media that we are investigating you. This is to let you know that we are not. Sincerely yours." I wrote them back and really thanked them for that. My family really appreciate it. Life has its risks, okay? We are a great country. We are a country of risk takers. Anybody that's in business knows that. Anybody that does anything out of the ordinary knows that. So it's a question of weighting the risks. I can't help you with that, but I believe fervently in my country. And I also believe that it is only as strong as its citizens require it to be. And if you have somebody as a judge or a police officer, you know, a police officer has an enormous power over us, carrying a badge and a gun, and they can order us to lie down on the ground, and et cetera, et cetera. We have to hold them accountable. We have to hold them accountable at all levels of government. So if, when, and where I can't help you, I just hope that you do. And the more you do, the more others will as well. I'm going to leave you with the story as well as with my thanks. It's been a pleasure for me to share these thoughts with you. And the story is about a man who was on his deathbed, very end of his life. He called his wife to his side and said, "Well, dear, I know I'm not long for this earth, but before I leave you, I just have to get something off my chest. That for a number of years now, I've been having an affair with such and such a woman that lives across the street. And I'm sorry to hurt your feelings, but I think you had a right to hear this and hear it from me." She looked at him. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "That's okay. I know. That's why I poisoned you." Well, in such a similar way, we are poisoning ourselves, maybe unintentionally, by our choice of drug policy. This has been a poison. This has harmed, killed, mutilated, degraded many people. And it doesn't have to be this way. And it takes us, like with cigarettes, you know, just to shine a light on it, just to say, wait a minute, what about this? You know, you've asked me some decent questions tonight on Prop 64. I've tried to answer as best I can. Sometimes I just say I don't know. But ask questions. Hold people accountable. We took 2 hours today to talk to your members of the Board of Supervisors. It was a fait accompli. Jessica knew it to begin with, and so did a lot of other people who were here that were there. Nonetheless, they hold their feet to the fire and say, we're here too. You know, we are constituents. We are members of this community. I've lived my whole life in Chico. Wherever it happened to be, it matters. It matters. People who are your elected representatives will respond to you because politicians are really, really good at one thing, and that is following the votes. And if they think that the votes are there, you got them. And write them a letter. Don't waste your stamp on somebody you can't vote for. But if you can vote for that person, a mayor, a city councilman, a senator, they will respond. Democracy is a participation sport. And it's up to us. It's our government. If it ain't working, whose fault is it? It's ours. So thank you for sharing the evening again. Let's wish each other well. Nah, let's do better than that. Let's go and get it done. Thank you so much. Somebody wants some of this material, feel free.
One quick question on my
Certainly.
way out. I'm interested in, as you could tell, in the how we move from where we are.
I'm going to unrecord this.
Go ahead. Okay. How we move from where we are in a rational manner.